place. And as Tracy has already said, I'm coming to you from Johannesburg, South Africa. I've actually just driven back 2 hours from our men's Olympic hockey team camp, where I was spending the day with them yesterday. I've had the immense privilege of working almost as a life coach and a mentor with the Springbok rugby team for about a decade, up to 2015. But I love the intersection of elite sport and youth development. And today I'm just going to be sharing some thoughts around motivation, then some thoughts around coaching philosophy, and then just maybe one or two ideas around being an ideal team player. I know so many of you are familiar with these statistics, but just a reminder that when it comes to motivation, that I think it's less than 1% of the sports passionate community are actually playing sport at an elite level. And it's so...
Are you sharing your slides? Have you got slides, or do you want me to share?
Thank you so much, Tracy. Is that... Tracy, thank you for that. Are those coming up now?
Perfect, yeah.
You got that. All right. So when it comes to sport, only about 1% of people are playing at the elite level. And I look forward to a few minutes interacting over questions just now, but we know that the ego is a major driver, something that pushes and propels us forward as we and athletes aspire to play at the top of their game. But some of the conversations that I've been involved with in the last year or two is that with the ego, there's a continuum, and that there's a healthy ego that has the right aspirations. I've been working with a teenage girl goalkeeper who wants to make it to America to get a college bursary for her education and to further her soccer. But we are seeing so much toxic ego as well, and almost twisted egos that I would submit to you that some of that ego is perverted, and we're seeing different things take place. Interestingly, we work quite extensively in rugby, that we're actually seeing in certain teams, certain countries, just a culture of honor undergirding the competition, and that a toxic motivation that would have formerly driven people into a contact sport such as that is being held in such good tension with a culture of honor, just aspiring to be the best one can, but also honoring other people in the sport. And I think that one of the great pictures we have before us at the moment is the top three men in men's tennis right now, Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic, who have such aspirations to be the leading Grand Slam title holders. But yet, if you see the interchanges at the net afterwards, there seems to be some extraordinary mutual honor, respect, and for one another. So that is one picture, I think, that is before us in world sport right now in terms of healthy ego. Mastery is another major driver. Just to get out there again and again. Yesterday at our hockey Olympic camp, we had a down day after 4 matches, but a whole lot of the men couldn't resist the 45 minutes before our evening dinner to be out on the AstroTurf again and just honing their skills. Even though it was a rest day from hockey, there's just this constant aspiration to master something that can bleed into our sense of well-being, our self-esteem, and just a contentment of us moving forward. And that's not just in sport, but it's mastering any skill. It could be mastering playing the guitar or piano, but it's something built into the fabric of our being. And I can remember at a social level when I took up canoeing one year, and I taught myself in the winter, but I kept going out to this freezing water time and time again and falling in repeatedly. But there was just this aspiration to master a new skill. Social belonging, connection is another major motivator. That sense of gravitating towards team sports, Many, even if we are participating in an individual sport, whether that's swimming or running or things like that, many of us love to belong to clubs, to training units, and there's a great sense of cohesion. So those are some of the big motivators. And something I'll just throw out, I haven't included in the slide, but some people are already participating, or their ultimate end is a higher purpose. I see this coming to play in South Africa. When we won the Rugby World Cup at the end of 2019, the players were playing for something bigger than rugby. It was something about the fabric of our nation, healing in our nation, the social consequences of that. So just a few thoughts on motivation. Maybe you could just read that slide as I transition to some thinking on coaching philosophy. In this space, we often are working with individual athletes, but we are often privileged to be in a position where we help shape club cultures, team cultures, entire environments. And that is another aspect of sports psychology, is that we're not just working with individual athletes, but we can actually be a voice in and an architect in an entire environment. And I think it's essential that we ask ourselves various questions here, and this could be an individual question, or it could be asked of a team per se. But when we're considering our coaching philosophy or your team's approach, is do you know yourself sufficiently? Do you know the strengths individually and collectively? What approaches do you have to motivation and to leadership? How are you going to go about your coaching? Moving on to the culture you want to be building, or sometimes it's us making a decision whether we want to be part of a certain culture, is what are the values that we're subscribing to? What are the correlating behaviors that exhibit those values? Is a vision something that we construct on our own as a coach, or is it a collective masterpiece where different voices are brought in and we form a tapestry of that? How does communication take place in the midst of one's team setting, in the midst of one's club? And one I hope we have a minute to discuss as well is, what does success look like? What is our success in winning the same thing? And I have been involved in soccer clubs amongst teenagers where our main aspiration was to occupy teenagers in the afternoons from very destructive ways of life. And we happened to be playing some incredible football as well, but that was the main aspiration. And moving on to knowing your context and environment. Is it an amateur or professional environment? Our hockey team is going, men's hockey team and women's hockey team are going to the Olympics now. And as South Africans, we are still amateur. And guys are working a job, they're training in the evenings or before work in the morning, that are different to many of the European clubs or the Australians who are signed into the Olympic body. So we have to be mindful of the context in which we're coaching. What if you're in a club context or a school context? What are the expectations? In South Africa, I'm not sure if it's similar to your part of the world. Parents project huge expectations onto coaches, onto sports and club bodies. Some of you are operating in an environment where there are gigantic expectations from the supporters. So it's good to ask who are the major voices in your environment? How do you get your voice to come out with greater clarity? How do you build and forge those bridges of connection so that you can influence that context? And then knowing your athletes, knowing your team. One of my dear friends, Paddy Upton, has coached a lot of cricket in India. He coached, assistant coached the national team and coaching in the IPL. And he would individually drink coffee with the different players, asking them, if you're in an extreme pressure situation, how is the best way that I could talk to you? What do you need from me in high pressure moments? And he made those those distinctions between different players and their approaches. So just some thoughts I'm throwing out there around coaching philosophy. And then something that I guess speaks to both the motivation piece and the coaching philosophy, something that we've used with our national men's hockey team is a picture of what does an ideal team player look like. And in the top left-hand side, we speak of an ideal team player being humble, and that ties back into the ego piece once again, that there is ego there. However, it is not excessive. The players are willing to share the credit with others. They contribute to the whole and are just as happy to play the assist role and don't have to score the goal the whole time. So is there an essential essence of humility in a player's life? The next piece there is a hunger. Is the ideal team player, and I guess this is speaking very much at an elite level, are they looking for more? Is that coming from a sense of intrinsic motivation? Are they thinking ahead to the next step? Are they anticipating where they need to develop? Is there good self-reflection and that taking place? Is there that drive and that appetite? And the last piece there, and I know this is a simple model, but it just helps us have conversations with our players, and that is smart. And that's not really as much an emphasis on the intellectual side, but people smarts, emotional intelligence, knowing the impact that you as an individual have on a team, knowing how to communicate with other players in your team to address the issue and not the person per se. And I'm going to trickle in a bit of our South African story to you here, in that we went into hard lockdown last April for a number of months, and our Olympic hockey team met on Zoom for 6 months, one night a week. And as Black Lives Matter, that fresh awareness of things was taking place in the world, we felt it was imperative for us to have that conversation within our team. So we spent a number of months having vulnerable conversations with one another. We live in a very diverse country. Our team is made up of people from many different backgrounds. And we realized that we had to go in and have some deep and vulnerable conversations around how we perceived one another based on our history as South Africans. And I believe that we have made significant progress in our understanding of one another, that higher levels of trust have come into the team as we really understand what people's motives are and where they're coming from. So that is an essential thing to have within a team context, is just those people smarts, that EQ, that understanding of how a team operates. So friends and colleagues, those are a few thoughts dumped down around motivation, coaching philosophy, and an ideal team player. Tracy, I think I'm slightly ahead of time. I was rambling on there, but yeah, let's throw it open for some conversational questions. Thanks for joining me.
Brilliant, Iain. Impeccable timing. Look at that. I was just ready to put up my sign and there you were. So does anyone have any questions for Iain? I'll open up the floor. Feel free to jump on the mic, or feel free to put some questions in the chat box and I can send them to Iain.
Can I ask a question, or was there a question coming up there?
I was going to ask a question, Iain. As far as working with athletes and the building or the balancing of being humble as a and how would you, what's some strategies that you can use to allow people to be humble, but also confident. I would probably say that looking at the Scotland team, there's an element of humble and self-deprecation, I think. How do you strike the balance where to try and build confidence, but keep people being humble?
So I think a lot of that humility is, I guess it's in the sportsmanship, but also it's in our relationships one towards one another. So you're wanting to go out there with an edge of confidence to believe that you can execute things. But I think especially in the team dynamic, Tracy, of just being willing not to have the spotlight on you the whole time, be the player who makes the assists. So humility also comes up in being able to take feedback. So I guess complementary concepts, but yeah, that's how in some ways I distinguish some of those. Yeah.
Fab. So we've got some questions coming in the chat box, Iain. So we've got Alan asking about how do you address the question of what success looks like in various sport environments that you've worked in? Great.
So I think a lot of it has to do with the environment in which we're in, and the expectation of the school, the club. So I often use the terminology or the language is that there's more than one scorecard or points board. So I think it's essential that we understand we are playing to accumulate points or run a certain time, but what other things can we put up there that are measurable? But it's important that you as a coaching staff are on that journey, that the parents or the club members, but I think it's important to have a conversation. Is everything just about winning on the scoreboard, or how can we measure progress, character development, and things such as that?
Yeah, brilliant. Another good question from Eleanor about asking if you spend time to identify individual motivators for athletes in a team, and do you think this is something coaches should try to do?
Is that in the chat box there? Would you just repeat that, Tracy?
So do you spend time identifying individual motivators for athletes in a team, and do you think this is something that coaches should try to do, so individual motivators?
I think if you've got the capacity and time, I think it would depend on your context, but I think the more you're knowing what some of those what is driving and motivating a person, the more useful that is. I did an exercise yesterday with the team of what persona do you have? How do you want to show up in the field? What are you bringing? So I think the more you're aware of that, the more, yeah, you're going to be able to help and assist those people.
Fab. And then we've got another question about building resilience in teams during the hard lockdown in South Africa. How did you do that?
Incredibly challenging, and as I speak to you from Johannesburg, we're in a terrible third wave at the moment with thousands of infections every day. So a lot was done online. A lot was done in buddy systems and support systems. We were doing core work training online, constantly sharing with one another, and also we tried to really destigmatize the whole concept of mental health, and we had the coach and others really being vulnerable about that. So we really also tried to say it's okay. So we played around with the concept of a lot of us use the word mental toughness, but we chose to use the word mental resilience, because we said it can take an enormous amount of effort to constantly appearing tough and all together, and especially those of us who are men. So we encouraged guys to take the makeup off and be real with one another. So that was part of it. It was just encouraging vulnerability and transparency and creating that sort of environment.
Yeah, brilliant. Does anyone have any other questions for Iain? Want to come on the mic, Mark?
Yeah, could I just ask a question, please? That'd be great. Thank you, Iain. That was really interesting. It was just a question around coaching philosophy. So do you have any experience or insight into I guess, talent pathways who have multiple coaches coaching in them, each of them perhaps having a slightly different view on the way something could be taught, coached, or indeed played. And how do you build that into one united approach of thinking, where you have coaches who are probably have very different views on how something could be done, and just in terms of a unified approach?
Mark, a tremendous question. And so I think depending on how our structures are built, I think so in the South African context, we often have a sports director or director of national rugby or something. So that's dealing. So sometimes, Mark, we also wanting to celebrate individuality. So maybe it's the end goal or the why that one's aspiring to reach, but celebrating that there are different approaches towards that. So it's, I guess it's celebrating diversity, coming under a common aspiration to do something. But that comes back to, for some of you who are sitting in the previous session, is the more we have a common aspiration, common language, it can really help as people move from age group to age group or different sports sectors. I hope that helps at all, Mark.
No, thank you. Thank you. Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that very insightful presentation, Iain. And really,
it's a pleasure.